In this edition of WCW Blunder, I'm going to cover a lot of matches that could have been given their own respective episodes. We're looking at the worst WCW gimmick matches today, and hey, just to put it out there, WCW weren't the only ones who put on daft or silly gimmick matches, but they sure did have a lot of them. So much so that I had to leave a ton off. Still, the ones I picked out here are the ones that I feel deserve to get mentioned, and we're going to dish out blunder points as we work through each and every match. So sit back, relax, and wonder what on earth the higher-ups were thinking as we look at WCW's most questionable gimmick matches. Right, so this one shouldn't be terrible in theory. Mike Awesome had become the career killer after throwing Chris Kanyon from the top of the triple cage, so he had this thing going on for ambulances. The Wall, meanwhile, liked to put folks through tables, so a match was booked between these two where you could win by either putting your opponent through a table or putting them in an ambulance. One of these tasks was way easier than the other, but it's okay, we'll let it pass. What I can't let pass is the fact that the match only went for 1 minute and 23 seconds before the Wall got put through a table, so that's a blunder point. You need to slow things down, boys. The bell rings, but the fight continues. They end up fighting on the entranceway where Mike's new blood teammate Shane Douglas takes out the Wall with a steel pipe. This results in the guys going backstage where DDP hops out of an ambulance and he ends up putting Awesome inside. And while this is going on, Douglas continues fighting with the Wall. So Awesome's gone to hospital, he's gone in the ambulance, Douglas is still busy fighting. The cameras then cut and we see Shane and Awesome carrying a coffin that was supposed to represent Ric Flair's career. There was no commercial break or anything like that. WCW just aired a pre-tape that completely screwed up the continuity. So that's another blunder point. The production's absolutely terrible. Hulk Hogan would come up with ways of doing the job without actually doing the job. It was a frequent occurrence in WCW, and these ideas probably sounded fine during production meetings, but in the ring, it just left fans feeling ripped off or confused. This is what happened at Uncensored 99 when Hogan faced Ric Flair in a First Blood cage match. It was made crystal clear that the only way to win this match was to make your opponent bleed. It was even made clear again during the match itself when Hogan put Flair in a figure 4 and the commentator said Hogan can't win the match via submission or pinfall. Hogan shoved Flair into the cage, the Nature Boy bladed. That should have been the end of the match, but no. With blood pouring down his face, Flair was allowed to continue on and the referee didn't call for the bell, so you can have a blunder point for that. Hogan would then drop the leg on Flair, he covered him to win via pinfall, but the referee wouldn't count. So blunder point number 4, because at this moment in time, no one has a clue how you're supposed to actually win this thing, including the commentators. The referee then changed his mind and he counted a cover when Flair tried to pin Hogan, but Hulk kicked out and he delivered another leg drop. This time Charles Robinson did go down for the count, but Flair kicked out. Do keep in mind that Hogan was now bleeding too, so you can throw the First Blood rule out the window. Arn Anderson then passes Flair a tire iron while the referee's distracted. Blunder point number 5, because the referee doesn't need to be distracted if there's no disqualifications, though to be fair, they are making the rules up as they go along here. Rick hits Hogan, he applies the figure 4, the ref gives a fast 1-2-3 for Flair to win the match, win the championship and become the president of WCW. Now yes, Charles Robinson was in Ric Flair's pocket, but don't you think you could have come up with something that wasn't so ridiculously confusing? The commentators were scrambling to come up with explanations and it made them look like absolute idiots, trying to tell folks at home what was going on while obviously not having a clue themselves. As much as the Chamber of Horrors does deserve to be here, I'll admit to still kinda liking this absolute mess just because it's so cheesy and corny. The match was first promoted as Sting, the Steiners and Elegante versus Barry Windham, the Diamond Stud, Oz and the One Man Gang. Abdullah the Butcher would replace One Man Gang because apparently OMG refused to do a job to PN News. Oz got taken out and instead he wrestled Bill Kazmaier. Barry Windham, who turned babyface just before Halloween Havoc, got taken out at the very beginning of the show. So Oz and Barry Windham got replaced with Big Van Vader and Cactus Jack. Blunder point for all these replacements. The card may be subject to change, but that's 3 guys changed in a 4-man team. The match itself's hilarious. You've got coffins, weapons, and an electric chair sitting in the middle of the ring. The guys used the coffins for a couple of bumps that looked okay, I guess, but that electric chair was controlled by a switch that had no tension whatsoever. It would flop down to the on position quite a lot, yet no one got zapped. In the end, it was Abby who got fried, and the visual itself is just so ridiculous. But again, I kinda like this one just because it's so bad it becomes good. It's a Halloween Havoc classic for all the wrong reasons. This one keeps coming back to haunt me. Just when I think I'm done with this match, I have to keep going back to revisit it again, and it just gets more tedious each and every time. Hogan and Savage versus Ric Flair, Arn Anderson, Lex Luger, The Faces of Fear, Kevin Sullivan, Z Gangsta, and this chop right here. A chop WCW named The Final Solution before getting a ton of negative feedback, so that'll be a blunder point. How stupid do you have to be? The idea of the match was for the babyfaces to work their way down to the ring at the bottom of the triple cage, kinda like a reverse Game of Death without the excellent kung fu. Hogan and Savage got to the bottom, it felt like all hope was lost, but here comes the Booty Man to help his friends out by handing them a few frying pans. Yes, frying pans, and yes, the Booty Man. Blunder point 8. The babyfaces thought they'd done enough damage and they go to leave the cage, but then Savage remembers that he has to actually pin someone to get the victory. He dashes back in, he gets the 1-2-3, and the Mega Powers are back in business. So up until this point in his WCW run, Hogan had kayfabe retired Ric Flair, he main evented Starrcade with his buddy Ed Leslie, he made Big Van Vader look soft as shit, and at Uncensored 95, he and his buddy destroyed 8 bad guys in one match. You can see why WCW fans were maybe getting a bit tired of the red and yellow brother. 14 guys entered the Hardcore Junkyard Invitational match at Bash at the Beach 99, and a lot of these guys got legitimately injured. So imagine hurting yourself for a match that was so chaotic that fans watching at home couldn't even follow what was going on. From badly timed set pieces that included Jerry Flynn trying to create some sparks inside a car hood only for him to give up and the car still magically exploding, to Sandman requesting help from his opponents when taking a bump. This was one giant mess that really achieved nothing. It's not like you can watch it the same way you'd watch other hardcore matches and enjoy seeing big bumps taking on hard objects, and that's because the production work was truly abysmal. I could go through this and hand out a ton of blunder points, but I'll just give it one and be done with it. I'm not putting myself through the torture of watching this one again. Fit Finlay wins the Hardcore Trophy. It was a terrible way for WCW to integrate hardcore wrestling into their regular programming, and nobody cared. WCW Nitro in 1997 was pretty damn good, but one of the show's worst segments in history happened on the 3rd of March 1997. Roddy Piper needed a family to take on the NWO and Team WCW at Uncensored 97. He was a lone wolf in this WCW vs NWO war, and he didn't want to rely on WCW's biggest names to back him up. So instead he hosted a gauntlet match where 6 tryouts would take place live on Nitro, and the 6 men who came to the ring were nobodies. Well, 5 of them were nobodies, and we also had John Tenta. The matches were all done in a crappy shoot style where Piper would ask the audience if they approved of Roddy's opponent or not, and the first guy selected was Craig Malley, a stuntman Piper knew and rumoured to be a bag-carrying young boy. Not saying he was, but it was heavily rumoured. The crowd booed Malley out of the building, and you could tell this was all Piper's idea when he told the fans they were being too harsh, and then to try to get the fans' approval, he would fight Craig again. He was so desperate for the fans to accept this guy that Roddy actually fought him again, and they hated it. They hated every moment of this entire segment. Have blunder point number 10. The next guy was another stuntman apparently. He gave Piper a brutal wedgie while going for a press slam, and that was enough to gain entry into Roddy's family. Blunder point 11, I guess. And finally, John Tenta was selected. I do like Big John Tenta, but we're going up against the NWO here. This is not the squad you need, Mr. Piper. This 20-minute snooze fest of a segment bombed so hard that 3 of the 4 horsemen ended up becoming Piper's family, while the other 3 guys were told their services were no longer needed. So in the end, the Nitro Gauntlet was all for nothing, and better yet, the NWO won the match at Uncensored 97. In the midst of the Filthy Animals vs Revolution rivalry in WCW, Shane Douglas said the Revolution had come up with a new match concept. It was, according to Shane, the most brutal match type WCW had to offer, the most cruel and sadistic setting imaginable for those stinking Filthy Animals. Shane said this upcoming House of Pain cage match was the most dangerous structure WCW had ever built, and so naturally fans got curious as to what this thing was gonna be. Moments later, fans got their answer when they saw a regular WCW cage that had handcuffs attached to it. And yeah, that was it. Blunder point 12 for getting my hopes up. To win the match, you had to apparently handcuff both of your opponents to the cage, but the referee only called for the bell after he himself got attacked. Fans didn't know if the Revolution won or if they had got disqualified inside a cage match, and if you look up match records today, most agree that the Animals won the match via disqualification, even though Schiavone said the Revolution won. Take another blunder point for still confusing fans nearly 25 years later. It is pretty hilarious though. The way Shane was talking, you'd think this was going to be some new brutal wrestling match that was unlike anything we'd ever seen before. In the end, it was an extremely low effort cage match with a confusing ending. This one commonly gets called Judy Bagwell on a pole, even though in a pole match you win by retrieving an item of some sorts. The match was actually a standard one-on-one match that had Judy Bagwell placed at ringside on a forklift, and if Buff Bagwell could beat Chris Kanyon, he'd get to bring his mom down from the elevated platform held up by that forklift. Kanyon did say it was supposed to be Judy Bagwell on a pole, but he, and I quote, couldn't find a pole that would hold that big fat battle axe, so he opted for a forklift instead. How Kanyon got a forklift is anyone's guess. We have a run in here from David Arquette, and although I find the dude quite endearing, I'm still giving this a blunder point, and Buff ended up winning after delivering a double blockbuster to Kanyon and David. I wasn't sure if I should have included this one because it is essentially a one-on-one match that just has a unique prize for the winner, but I know you guys would have ripped me apart if I didn't mention it. Just the name Judy Bagwell on a pole's enough to make people laugh, and it is one of the more questionable matches that took place during the final days of World Championship Wrestling. Everyone says the 1998 War Games match was the worst of all time, but I think this one tops it. Now, folks will argue that it's not a real War Games match, and I do agree to a certain extent. The rules are very different. It uses the 3-tier cage and it only features one ring, but Vince Russo billed it as War Games 2000 and he used the good name of War Games to promote this atrocity, so like it or not, War Games 2000, also known as Russo's Revenge, is part of the match type lineage. The WCW Championships hung above the triple cage. Not only does the competitor have to retrieve the belt, they also have to climb back down and walk out of the bottom cage while holding the championship. It's not a bad idea in theory, but the execution of the match is truly woeful, plus it wouldn't be a big Russo match without a swerve. Earlier in the evening, Kevin Nash and Russo had a falling out because Russo was putting Big Kev's WCW Championship up for grabs in this match. Nash was going to be part of Russo's War Games team that also featured Jeff Jarrett, Scott Steiner, the Harris Brothers, and Vince Russo himself. Blunder point 15 for Russo actually competing in matches. What a silly idea that is. So with Kev and Russo not getting along, there was some friction within the heel team. These guys were taking on Goldberg, Sting, Booker T and Chronic, and that falling out that Russo had earlier on with Big Nash was nothing more than a ploy. In the end, Bret Hart showed up to close the bottom cage door in Goldberg's face. This gave Vince the opportunity to hand Kevin Nash the world belt, and the two hugged it out before Kev stepped out of the cage. Blunder point 16 for the swerve. It was to be expected, but still, it's terribly overdone. The match never should have been billed as a War Games contest. The action that took place inside the triple cage was nothing to write home about. It had a typical WCW 2000 ending, and it felt like another giant waste of time. On the same episode of Nitro that gave us the House of Pain cage match, we also got to see the abysmal Piñata on a pole match. A match where Russo took the WCW luchadors and handed them a bunch of sticks. These sticks could be used to beat each other or beat the Piñata who Juventud Guerrera brought to the show, seeing as he just returned from his son's birthday. Inside the Piñata was a check for $10,000 because Russo felt the cruiserweights didn't earn enough money. And yeah, the idea is bad enough, but the fact that WCW couldn't even rig the match up properly speaks volumes. Like, a pole match must be one of the easiest gimmick matches to set up, yet the Piñata fell from the pole very early on, and the guys in the ring had no idea what to do with it. Blunder point 17 for getting the most basic thing totally wrong. Another blunder point goes for our special guest commentator for this match, Oklahoma. Russo and Ferrara thought it would be a great idea to make fun of Jim Ross and Jim's health by presenting this parody character, which really was in bad taste. Hoovy ends up shaking the Piñata until he finds the check. Steve Williams then beats everyone up, and when Silver King thinks he's going to claim the money, he ends up getting it taken away by Dr. Death. So not only did the Luchadors have to stumble through this poorly set up match, none of them actually won the prize money. What is a catch-as-catch-can match? Well, catch-as-catch-can is a legitimate grappling martial art that came from the UK. It became a predetermined professional style of wrestling in the 1920s, long before the pro style we see today on TV was made popular. But in the world of WCW, catch wrestling's a bit more simple, as in it has absolutely nothing to do with catch wrestling, and it basically means if you leave the ring, you'll lose the match. Blunder point 19 just for the sheer ignorance of it, because pins were the predominant way to win catch matches, though rules could change from venue to venue. Now, again, to be fair to WCW, apparently the ring ropes were going to get removed for this one, which would have made it a bit different, I guess. But they ultimately decided against it, and instead we got the floor is lava in the opening match at Sold Out 2000. Dean Malenko and Billy Kidman were featured in this catch-as-catch-can match, and Malenko completely forgot the rules. He left the ring on his own accord for a short timeout, and the referee had no choice but to call for the bell at the 2-minute 26-second mark. So as much as I hate to do it, it's a blunder point for the Iceman right here. He did legitimately forget the match rules, and the bout ended way sooner than originally planned. Kudos to the referee for ending the match though. It's kinda surprising that Robinson just didn't allow it to continue while the commentators tried to explain that Malenko had to be physically thrown to the outside or something. But yeah, a pretty funny botch right here. Not letting these men leave the ring and confining them like this was kinda stupid too. Kidman in particular could do some good stuff from the ring to the outside, so the match type only hampered the participants down in my opinion. WCW tried to spice up their first uncensored pay-per-view by adding a bunch of stipulation matches. One of these matches was contested under martial arts rules, which basically meant absolutely nothing. Ming took on Jim Duggan here, Sonny Ono served as the special guest referee, and it's a standard match that just features a different referee and Jim Duggan looking like a random thug you'd see in a crappy late 80s action movie. In an effort to give most matches on this card some sort of gimmick, you can see WCW really struggled here, and I guess having Sonny Ono in a karate gi was WCW's interpretation of what martial arts was. There was no point system in place, there was no altered rules. This was a standard wrestling match, ladies and gents, and on top of that, it was a bad standard wrestling match. Oh, sorry, the competitors had to bow to the referee and bow to each other before the bell, so that's what made it different. Blunder point 21. In the end, Duggan went for Ming's manager, the sneaky Colonel Robert Parker, and when Ono tried to pull Duggan away, Ming was able to kick his opponent for the 1, 2, 3. From the same pay-per-view, we've got the King of the Road match, Dustin Rhodes versus the Blacktop Bully. You've got two guys fighting on the back of an 18-wheeler, they roll around in the hay, they stumble and fall when the vehicle has to stop or take a corner. There's also the problem of actually capturing the footage, which WCW did a decent job with honestly, but still, the action they were capturing just wasn't good. So while the idea was pretty out there, the premise of the match itself didn't really lend itself to a good pay-per-view match, so have a blunder point, boys. It must have cost a fortune to film this match. They used helicopters to film the truck, they had to close off roads, so to spend all that cash only to end up with a blunder is WCW in a nutshell really. Because both men got colour during the bout, both men were fired from the company. When you remember that this was a pre-taped match and WCW had the option of not showing it at all if blood was really going to be that much of a problem, then you have to hand out another blunder point. Everyone involved did return to WCW eventually, but the company letting Dustin go was what gave WWF fans the Goldust character. When you're done watching this video, do me a favour, check out the AJ Styles vs Undertaker Boneyard match with all its great production values and great presentation. And then check out the Vampiro vs Demon Graveyard match at Bash at the Beach 2000. I know television productions evolved over the years and WWE has a lot more disposable income these days, but my god, the WCW match looks like a high school project in comparison. The Demon's walking around with a torch along with Asia and Charles Robinson looking for Vampiro. Vampiro's nowhere to be found, but all of a sudden he jumps from a tree like some sort of gothic chimpanzee, and the two then proceed to bore the hell out of viewers at home by having a little scrap beside a shallow grave. Eventually the Demon goes in and Vampiro grabs Asia. The Demon then has to locate the two, and during this time Vampiro decided to hide in a lake. This gives Vampy Balls a chance at a sneak attack, but all this results in is two face painted dudes splashing around in the water. Vampiro takes Asia away again. The Demon has to go find her. He sees Asia lying beside a coffin and he doesn't think for a moment that Vampiro could be inside. It all ends with the Demon getting a piece of a tombstone smashed over his head. He gets put inside the coffin. Vampiro wins the match and fans demand their time back. One big giant blunder point for one big giant mess. Vampiro then headed back to the arena only to get attacked by a returning Sting, so at least something decent came out of all this. But then Russo came down to cut his famous promo against Hulk Hogan and normal WCW service had officially resumed. The very core of a pro wrestling match, no matter what the stipulation, should at least include guys or girls competing with some sort of physical contact. But in the crazy world of WCW, that kind of thing just isn't necessary. Let's get some monster trucks, let's drive them around the roof of a big building, and let's do it sumo style. Blunder point 25, just look at it. You go out of bounds and you lose the match. It's kinda like a WCW catch can match, only with giant vehicles. Hulk Hogan took on the Giant here. This was when Hogan was getting in touch with his dark side even before the NWO came along, so just everything surrounding this one is pure WrestleBolics at its finest. Hogan wins the match because of course he does, and after the match Giant tried to choke his opponent out, but it was the big man who ended up in a tough spot. He fell off the roof of Cobo Hall and he plunged to his death, only to psych Hogan a little later on and return from the dead. Blunder point 26 for Raising the Dead live on pay-per-view. So yeah, monster trucks may be cool and all, but if I want to see them, I'll check out a monster truck show. Thank you very much. Loads have been left off here, such as the infamous Viagra on a pole match, the apple pie strap match, the Human Torch match, the San Francisco's 49ers match. I could have included the Steiner Asylum cage matches, though there's already a whole Blunder episode about that particular match type. There's more WCW nonsense out there, folks, so share your favourite bad WCW gimmick matches in the comments. We have a new number 1 on our leaderboard, although this video format kinda meant it was always going to take the top spot anyway. But who cares? You came here for the blunders, and I hope you leave this video feeling full, satisfied, and a bit cringy. Thanks for watching, folks, and please take care.